The SARS-CoV-2 virus is very sneaky, spreading between people before they have symptoms and when they have mild symptoms. Almost every country in the world has failed to contain this virus. It also seems likely it was spreading outside of China even before it was first identified by the Chinese scientists. Has it been indeed unfair and unreasonable for those who blame China for not containing the virus because they must think that China is so much better than all those other countries that didn't contain the virus either?
Helen Clark, your report said this was a preventable disaster. Part of being able to prevent that is transparency and honesty, and that's what was lacking, wasn't it, in the early days in China, where people who would blow the whistle were being targeted and silenced?
We saw that reported, of course. We also saw reported that when the doctors in Wuhan noticed the cluster of these cases of pneumonia of unknown origin, they did get testing done, and there was obviously information put into the public health arena about these cases. But there was a slowness to act in China. We looked at the whole month of January. We felt that the WHO didn't have the powers it needed to deal decisively with a situation like this. We felt that the public health emergency declaration of international concern could have been made earlier. But then we go on to say that February was a month of missed opportunity for most countries in the world when they should have been readying their defences and rather sat and watched. So there's so many lessons to come out of this pandemic. Be prepared, take WHO warnings extremely seriously. I hope every country now will review their experience with COVID, look at where they went wrong and resolve to do better next time a threat arises. Because we can't stop the threats arising. What we can stop is them developing into a catastrophic pandemic like this one has been.
And Eric, the fear is, of course, that there will be another potentially as well. We've already seen, I mean, you've spoken about, a pandemic 2.0 with Delta. What lessons do we learn in our ability to be able to work together? And particularly, I think, given the alarms that you raised earlier about China and questions about where this emerged from. There is still debate about whether it emerged in a lab or whether it emerged in a wet market. Now we're 18 months or so into this. What have we learned and what do we need to build on for the future?
Yeah, I think the origin debate is beyond the scope of this discussion, and I think we won't be able to have the answer for a while. And it's true that they've detected SARS-CoV-2 in Italy around Milan
September,
back
I think
in October, November. Yeah. Right, but I think the biggest failure is not what happened, how it started. We are going to get more pandemics of some sort of origin from animals at some degree. Many animals in the world already carry SARS-CoV-2. I think we can't avoid more pandemics in that sense. But what we can prevent is the catastrophic failure of our society to collectively come together. And this is not just criticism of people, but also of governments. Governments want to look the other way. They don't want disruption of the stock market. They want for things to keep open. And I think, that's a good thing. But at the same time, they completely dismiss, just like we all have our biases. We want to dismiss the things that are not the inconvenient truths, to borrow a phrase, so to speak. And I think that happens, that's a human psyche. And to prevent that, we really have to face things head on. That Dr. Mike Ryan, again, I cite him a lot because his philosophy that if you want to be right before you act, you will lose this pandemic. Perfection is the enemy of good. And I went to Geneva and spoke with WHO headquarters leaders just last month. And, they are still very much in the precautionary principle. And they said that's what countries should really learn. The precautionary principle is the best way to defeat the pandemic. Not complacency, not, basically hopes and dreams and prayers, because those are not strategies in a pandemic, especially something that has long COVID implications that will harm our economy and our costs of our healthcare system for decades to come. And I think our children are the future, and we should go send kids to school. but with masks and ventilation.
Okay,
And that's
we've certainly
my main
made
bottom line.
that point. Just on that point about children, you have children here, Damien, and your children have lost a couple of years of their lives, of not being able to be around family, not being able to visit the United States. What are these other things that we have lost and the impact it has particularly on children?
Well, I think it's important to think about costs that are not economic. You know, birthday parties that were never had, family gatherings that will never be replaced, that never happened. You know, funerals and weddings that were delayed and that were shrunk in size and where people never really got the closure that they wanted. And I think there are enormous costs that we don't often think about when we're thinking purely in terms of opening up as an economic thing. And for my family,
your
my
children
kids
have missed their grandparents.
Yeah, my kids haven't seen their grandparents in longer than they've ever not seen them. They haven't seen their cousins. My children are, you know, growing from little children to teenagers at a time when they're not able to see their family at all. And I know that my family is heartbroken about that. I'm heartbroken about that. And I'm far from alone. There are so many people in much more difficult circumstances than me whose families are disconnected. And I'm not sure that Australia has ever really fully grappled with that. That what you're doing, to a certain extent, is keeping families apart. And yet, the hope is, if we do this right, we can all come back together and do that. And that's perhaps what the message that also isn't being said, is this isn't just about protecting, you know, your family from getting hurt and from getting sick. It's also about being able to bring our families back together. The more people get vaccinated, the more this country handles this well, the more unified families in Australia can be.
Stan, I think that as we look back on the lessons from the last year and a half, one of the things that we should be doing is looking at the strengths of where things have gone well, where communities have cooperated well. We've seen an amazing cooperation from Australians. And I love the example First Nations communities taking leadership right at the beginning, working with Aboriginal community-controlled health services, high-level cooperation between government and peak bodies that meant that Aboriginal communities were leading and are a global example of how to control COVID.
Yeah, it's a wonderful note to finish on and to remind us that the people who have been the foot soldiers in this, the people who have carried the load and the people who are going to get us to the other side are ordinary Australians, people who have made all of those sacrifices.